Welcome to the very third episode of the Ascension Speed Show. My name is Lift, and also joining me tonight is Animus. Animus, say hello.
Hello, friends.
And we're also very pleased to have another special guest this week, Sawyer.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Well, I just got off a boat, so I'm still alive. No pirates, as was mentioned. So, hey, we're excited.
All right.
Are you still wet?
I'm actually dried off on the way. So it was a close scheduling, but we made it.
Yes. Sorry about the few minutes of delay, but better late than never.
Right. Well, we'll get going. One of the first things we wanted to mention is that there is a KOL player named Don Pablo, and he has, I think, assisted over like 76 people getting their Slimelings. So we just wanted to give a quick shout out that if you're still in need of a Slimeling, go ahead and check his profile page for the qualifications and send him a K-mail and see if he can help you out. Anyway, I'll put his username in the show notes as well. And Animus, you had something about the Twitch affiliation. Do you want to give us the rundown on that?
Yeah, we're in the big boy leagues now. We can become affiliated, whatever that means. So I just need to complete the tax information. I need to talk to you about that, but we'll get to that. Any money we actually make from like subscriptions, if anyone actually subscribes, will be used to cover the podcast site costs, and then everything outside of that will be put back into the stream. Put back into the show as prizes. So we won't be making off with any profits. This isn't really for profit. So yeah, just a heads up. So if you see a subscribe button and you're feeling generous, go for it.
Hey, thanks so much for setting that up and getting the Twitch rolling. You've been quite our media spokesperson, so we appreciate it. And then just a reminder too, even if you can't think of a question this evening or whatever time of day it is for you, throughout the week, if you have a question that you think would be a good discussion topic for the show, please just throw it in our questions channel on Discord. Even I saw a couple people even put a prefix on their question saying podcast question. That's a great way for us to mark it, because we'd like to give away some Mr. Accessories for some of the most well thought out and best questions. So we'll move on to our first subject, which, hey, we have Sawyer. So this is fantastic. How did you find Kingdom of Loathing?
I started playing Kingdom of Loathing. I guess it would have been about 8 years ago at this point. Sort of a funny story. I was playing a game called Cyber Nations at the time, and I was getting kind of burnt out on that. And I asked players around, is there any other cool like online browser-based RPGs or strategy games? And somebody recommended Kingdom of Loathing, and I guess I was not impressed by it when I first started playing, because I noticed my character creation date is October 2010, and I think I logged in, I maybe played like the level 2 quest, and then I thought, this game looks kind of dumb. And then I basically quit for about 6 months. I don't really remember what got me reinterested, but started playing again in spring of 2011. And I guess it just sort of clicked the next time, and I thought it was a lot more interesting. So,
Yeah, same kind of scenario for me too. I think the clan I joined at the beginning was very helpful, because it just, I don't know if it was going to stick right at first. I heard they changed the starting adventures, so I think I had 200 when I first started. So if that hasn't always been the case, I'm sure that would have been really painful.
I don't remember. Did it used to just be 40?
Yeah, just thought it because I recently made a new account for anyway, and yeah, 200 adventures first day.
Yeah, I suspect that probably helps a lot, because I think that's why I probably played through all my turns in 10 minutes and thought, well, I'm done with this.
When did you start getting into the speed ascension?
Yeah, well, I was a pretty casual player for probably around 4 years or so. And then there's no one thing that really ramped up my activity. Probably towards the end of 2015, I was just spending a little bit more time planning out runs. The one thing I can point to that really got me active was in 2016. I think it's the March item of the month was the Witches set.
Oh, yes.
And just in general, I like puzzle games and stuff. And I went from like playing maybe 20 minutes a day and started doing those witches puzzles, which just sucked up a ton of time. And really, that just got me accustomed to logging in every day and actually paying attention to how to optimize certain things. The witches bosses too were sort of like this additional challenge that I hadn't been presented with before. And so really after that, just got a little bit more active, and then basically every month started getting a little bit better at doing ascensions and planning stuff out.
They gotta love the theming on that, because I think wasn't that right around when the game Witness was released, that line drawing puzzle?
Yeah, I hadn't actually played that game before, so the in-game Kingdom of Loathing puzzles were my first introduction to that. I played through most of those, and then I went and bought the Jonathan Blow game, which was really good too.
I enjoyed it as well.
Slightly off topic, but do you actually, in fact, have a friend called Huckleberry or something, Finn?
Huckleberry? No, I don't have any. Several people have called me Tom Sawyer, and then for some reason, for a while, people called me Soybean. I don't know what inspired that, but nope, no Huckleberries.
Oh, so you're not wearing dungarees now?
Nope.
This is very disappointing. Almost as disappointing as the turtleneck last episode with Cheese Cookie, but I guess I'll have to just live with it.
If I can be completely honest, I don't know if I've ever actually even read all of Tom Sawyer. I've read Huck Finn before, but I don't think I've actually read Tom Sawyer before.
We used to listen to them in the car sometimes, like as a audiobook. I can't remember who does it now, but anyway, it was pretty good. You got some good stories in there, Sawyer.
Yeah.
Right. So, which challenge path is your favorite and why? Can you remember which was your first challenge path that you actually really tried?
Well, this is going sort of back to my casual days. The first challenge path that I can remember, like planning anything out, was actually Jarlsberg. Now, I wasn't very good at that path, but for some reason, the whole like diet planning, I think that is what got me to at least start an Excel spreadsheet. Because I could remember looking at how to cook all the stuff and thinking, oh, I should actually plan out which ingredients go into various foods here. So I wasn't very active then, but that at least got me thinking about it. And then probably, let's see here, summer of 2016 was Source Path. That's kind of where I started getting decent. So that would be the first run. I think that was probably the first path where either that or standard, I started consistently being able to do like 2-day hardcore runs. My favorite path, I actually would probably go with Live, Ascend, Repeat. I don't know why, but just the challenge of spading out all the mechanics in that path and figuring out monster encounters, figuring out the non-combat versus combat stuff, I thought was really interesting.
I can see why. It was a spader's paradise.
Yeah. I also kind of liked it because it was at least an attempt to make a path where skill rather than RNG was going to dictate how well you did. That wasn't entirely true. There were still like 3 or 4 turns of randomness in the path, but
damn tavern.
Yeah, but overall, I really liked planning out that path. I've actually liked most of the challenge paths over the past 2 years.
Do you prefer softcore or hardcore?
I don't really have a preference. When I first started playing, I probably, like most players, preferred softcore just because it seemed easier. At this point,
little did they realize.
Yeah, in many ways, it's more challenging because, like in a 2-day run, you literally have 40 more choices to make in the run. It sort of depends on the path. One of the things that I like, and we'll probably get into this later, is I like when it is mildly challenging to get the minimum day count, but not excessively prohibitive. So, like actually the last path would have been G-Lever was a good example of this because you had to plan a little bit to be able to get a 2-day softcore or a 3-day hardcore run, but it wasn't something that was completely out of the range of the average player.
Right.
Yeah, it was a nice balance to get the turn gen in, but also obviously save as many turns as possible.
Right. Yeah. So really, it just depends on the paths. Certain paths I've liked the softcore better. Certain paths I like hardcore better. Just sort of I like kind of a nice balance of the game being difficult, but nothing that makes it impossible to complete a certain day count or a certain task or something.
How do you go about planning it? You said you have a spreadsheet. There's some more general tips that you have?
Well, the sort of cheater tip, and I think Ain expressed this to me recently, is you start by looking what the next best person or what the best current person in the leaderboard has done, and you basically plan to beat them by maybe 5 or 10 turns or so. Now, of course, that doesn't work at the very beginning of a path. That only really works with challenge paths in the last week or so. But usually, like, based on how fast you can do standard and what a challenge path looks like, you can come up with a rough estimate of how many turns it's going to take. It's also useful to sort of, either look at the forums or look at the wiki and see, are item drops going to be lower than normal? Are there any really difficult combats? So like at the very beginning of a new challenge path, I usually wait a day or two just to see what other people have to say. And then I kind of take whatever my plan for standard is and either add turn gen or add sources of item drops or something like that.
I like what you brought up about that item drop. Did you use that spleen item in G-Lever?
Yeah, I think the G-Lever, it was probably, I know I used at least one of them. I think if you were doing it right, maybe you should have used two of them. So like right now in most paths, you basically, the way it breaks down is there'll be sort of like two separate chunks where you're going to run high item drops, usually like towards the end of day one on airship, and maybe doing, I don't know, some other 10% item drop stuff. And then you throw most of your other high item drop zones sort of chained together with the Spooky Raven Cellar. And in standard, that's fairly easy to plan, but in certain challenge paths, like if you have limited, like you said, that spleen item in G-Lever, I don't remember how many turns that was. Was that 50 turns of
plus? 50, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so like there you would, I think the ideal way to set that up would be, plan ahead of time that you're going to get one of those on day one and use it in the airship, and then probably one on day two if it was a softcore run, and then use it on the cellar and the peaks and maybe a couple other zones.
Yeah, I found that in G-Lever, because I was basically trying to rush the cellar as quickly as possible so I could get the summon in at level 11. So I didn't actually use that item buff during that time. I was generally using it for the peak, rats, and there was something else I can't quite remember. But yeah, I think my runs for G-Lever were still not quite refined. I think I could chop off at least another 10 turns on both, like at the very, very minimum. But yeah, I don't think there was that much competition this challenge path around. I don't think people were that interested.
Yeah, there was a little spike at the beginning of August, but then like really the last week, I think it was you and maybe one or two other people that were going for it. I generally, I usually put in one halfway decent run towards the end of a challenge path, and then unless I find it really interesting, I just kind of let that sit and see what happens.
And speaking of which, Sad Oatcakes asks you, Sawyer, when you're doing a planned speed run, how much real time does a day's worth of turns take you? I've noticed that the more items of the month I have, the more time it takes to get anything arranged, and my playtime takes up more and more each day. How do you find a balance between playtime in terms of turns and not having it swallow up your entire day? Very good question.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. That was actually something I was going to get into later when talking about one-day runs. So first off, let's sort of just get a little survey here. When you guys are doing, well, I'll tell you if I do like a moderately well-planned hardcore standard run, I would guess it would be probably about maybe 2.5, probably about 3 hours on day one, and maybe 4 hours on day 2. Does that sound about right for you guys, or is it more or less?
I'm still kind of rusty, so it takes me a little longer on that first day, depending on if I'm trying out new routing or it's just if I haven't ascended manually in a while. So I'm gonna guess like 4 hours for day 1, and then a lot shorter for day 2.
On a scale of 0 to slow, I'm a good 9 slows, I think.
Okay, so that for people that don't know, that would be more time than I spend. uh, I think Yojimbo is notorious for being. He's probably not the slowest person, but he plans out a lot of spends a lot of time planning out his turns. So
Yeah, and it depends if he's streaming it as well.
right,
It takes longer to walk through your decisions vocally.
So anyway, an answer. There is no really good answer to that question. I think really the only actual solution is to be named Cheese Cookie or Ezandora and know how to script everything. Um, Even then, I don't know if large parts of the run that you can't really script very well. So right now, it does help if you plan out most of your item of the month resources before you start a run. And then it's really up to you how many things you want to change in the middle of a run. So, for example, I just did, just to test out the new challenge path, I did a softcore, sort of lazy softcore 2-day run. I did have to change a few things in the middle of the path, but for the most part, I have my genie wishes, my digitizes, my clovers, most of that stuff planned out from the very beginning. And if you plan all that stuff out, that will save you a lot of time. Now,
Absolutely.
If you want to be really competitive, you might end up switching some things around to save a turn or two. But if you don't mind just losing maybe 2 or 3 turns, you can plan most of your resources out from the very beginning.
Yeah, I got the in my softcore G-level run, I got the top floor wheel turning thing for the giants in 1 turn. That's so if anyone who doesn't know, that's where you have 1 turn left and you get the non-combat for the turning the wheel to complete the quest in the top floor, and it usually takes 2 turns, but if you only have 1 turn left, it only takes 1 turn. So that was minus 1 turn, which was quite nice, but it's annoying to have to plan, like go there with 1 turn and then do something else. Spend your turns until you've got 1 turn again, go back. Really, really annoying, but it does save a turn.
Right. There's a lot of tricks like that you can just kind of decide ahead of time, is this something that's worth me doing? If you're in a path that's competitive and you want the gold star, then yeah, you're probably going to have to try to do little tricks like that. If you're just trying to do, just trying to make day count or do a somewhat halfway decent run, then maybe beforehand you just think, well, I'm not going to try that trick. That takes too long to count my turns and stuff.
Yeah, it's a balance of how much fiddle is actually worth putting in most cases the chance to save a turn rather than a definite turn saving. So what direction are you hoping for items of the month / the speed game in general to take in the next few months, or even next year, obviously, when stuff starts to rotate out? So for example, maybe desk copying won't be a thing next year, as we discussed last week. Are there any general Ascension or design changes you're hoping for?
Yeah, over the rest of the year, there's nothing specific that I think is like high priority or anything. The one current difficulty for standard and for most paths is meat generation for the first couple turns. I think it would be kind of nice, maybe not something as powerful as like deck of every card that would give you 10k meat, but just an extra source of like 2k or 3k meat on the first turn. It would be kind of nice if that got integrated into some sort of item of the month. Other than that, there's not anything major that I think is necessary for this year, so I'm pretty much happy with whatever shows up. Next year is going to be sort of interesting because we're going to lose access to Source Terminal, we're going to lose access to Witches, we're going to lose access to the Foundry. So I know dev team have talked about like not excessively throwing turn generation stuff into items of the month, but I'm kind of hoping we get some sort of like consumables that are replacements for browser cookies, and I'm hoping something other than love and amarings for wanderers, because really, if you get rid of wanderers in a path, like that's a big part of Ascension planning is copying and finding places for wanderers. So I hope some sort of wandering monster mechanism next year, probably.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Moving on to just a little brief overview or follow up on our item of the month, the Bastille Battalion. How are we using or planning out those day 1, day 2 buffs and item drops? Is there anything we found in particular that's working well?
I think we're probably all in the same boat here. Basically, on turn 0, Bastille is literally one of the first things that I will use in a run. You use it for main stat gain. I think it bumps you up probably to like level 4, is it? Yeah, so it bumps you up to level 4 right away. And that will essentially, for some of the scaling fights that you fight early on, that will give you a significant boost for stat gain. So it's sort of double stat gain where you get that, 250 stats? Or probably is.
If you're not counting Moonsign, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so
275 with a moon sign.
Yeah, so if you get main stat, it's 275. That's going to help quite a bit with love fights and with witches monsters and with any other scaling monsters that you'd fight. So I would definitely take the main stat buff right away. And then, let's see here. Probably on day 1, this is actually going to depend on the challenge path and depend on how many other sources of stats you have. But I think the simple option is just take whatever your main stat accessory is. Both the muscle and moxie class, well, actually all classes have pretty good ones. If you, for some reason, were in a path where turn generation was really tight, maybe you'd want to take those draftsman's gloves, but otherwise probably just take whatever corresponds to your main stat. And then the buff, the Moxie one is probably the best one, although that kind of depends on your gameplay style.
Yeah, I find like the Moxie one is good just because it gives you that 25 to 50% initiative for the moderns.
Yeah.
And is that easily cappable now in standard?
It sort of depends. Assuming you have insta kills to burn, and the whatever the LTT skill is it Squint, Steely-Eyed Squint? Then you should be able to cap those easily. I don't know if you don't have that Squint effect, how hard it is to hit 850. I think you have to hit 850. So yeah, I would go with the Moxie Init meat buff on day 1 probably. And then day 2 it's a little more questionable. You could go with the whatever your tower test if you need a little bit of stat boost for that. You could go with the main stat one.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the player.
Right.
I think day count especially. So if it is a 2-day run, then you're probably leaning toward passing or helping out with your tower off stat tests. If this is a 3-day run, then you're probably putting it into main stat again.
This will probably interest absolutely no one, but the Bastille, if anybody actually does unrestricted runs anymore or old paths, Bastille is worth at least +1 turn because there's a source of a +8 familiar weight, which is a free runaway in unrestricted play. So I don't know if anybody cares about that, but I always notice when there's sources of free familiar weight buffs.
Just like to mention that those plus substat buffs really do add up because they also obviously doubled with the garbage tote shirt. So in one of my recent runs, I forgot to use the fortune buff, which is 5 main stat a turn, and I mean, all things considered, by a certain point in the run, about 100 turns later, I was about 1.5k main stat missing from not having run that 5 main stat a turn with all the scaling and stuff that also it helps with. So it does add up in the long run. So yeah, and especially in those paths where I think standard now getting to level 12 is so important, right?
Well, your jellyfish dictates your routing in the run, and level 12 is where your stench jelly monsters are, or your extracts, it is.
I just did was it hardcore? Yeah, hardcore standard run because I hadn't done one in a while, And I think it's actually been this way for a while. With a little bit of practice, you can consistently get to level 12 right at the beginning of day 2. And that basically allows you to potentially digitize a frogman right off the bat. And as you said, that'll give you some stench jellies fairly early on, which can force non-combat. So
It all depends on your routing and how many turns
Right.
you're playing day one. Because I know you, Sawyer, you're sometimes more of a fan of a lower turn count on day one, and then front loading all your adventures for day two.
yeah, it sort of depends on digitized targets.
I think the real concern here is why you're not port scanning the son of a beach.
Oh yeah, I did actually start doing that. I already forget what I did in the last. Oh yeah, that never occurred to me. If you actually could get to level 12 on day one, you could port scan all 5 of them. I forgot about that.
Say we take that whole day two idea and we throw it out the window. Okay, and we're trying to do this Ascension in one day. What are the main differences between planning a one-day softcore run and then having all of these resources they're used to? They're halved. So things like clovers and wishes and digitizes. So what are these differences? Walk us through it, Sawyer.
Okay, so the overall routing in a one-day run, luckily, is not a huge departure from how you do a two-day run. This has actually changed over time, by the way. One-day runs used to be very difficult because there weren't that many powerful items of the month, and you had to get to level 13 by like turn 250 or something to use hobo consumables. Now, luckily, that's not an issue anymore, but you do still have to. If you're trying to do a one-day softcore run, you have to be a little more aggressive with monster levels so you can level up quickly. And as you said, basically almost every item of the month gives you once per day or 3 times per day functions, and all of that stuff is going to be cut in half. So if you were going to attempt your first softcore run, I would, again, plan out 95% of the run right off the bat. Plan out what you're going to use your source terminal on, plan out what you're going to use the clovers on, and really the way I would do this is take, it might actually be more helpful to look at a plan for a hardcore run. That tends to be more similar to a one-day softcore run, and just sort of start paring down and figure out, well, what do I not need? So for example, I'm just going to look on a sheet here for like genie wishes. So if I was doing a two-day hardcore run in standard, I would probably wish for the desk, mountain man, and maybe a ghost on day 1. And then day 2, I would do maybe gouty pirate, potentially the forest ghost that gives you machete. And then there's a couple other options in there like skin flute or I don't know, a couple other targets. So what you need to do is you need to look at that list and say, okay, which of these actually matter? Well, probably the desk is still an optimal strategy. I think Ghost, now that's sucking up both a Genie Wish and a Digitize for both of those. But I would go ahead and wish and digitize a desk, wish and digitize a ghost, and then maybe either Mountain Man. Actually, I would almost certainly say Mountain Man would be a good last Genie Wish. And the reason for that is...
Well, that's because, like we were just talking about, speaking of resources being cut in half, clovers.
Right.
How are you deciding to allocate these?
So, like, that's something that dictates a lot of your choices. So clover use in a 2-day run, on average, you're going to get about 4 to 5 clovers. In a 1-day run, if you start on a 2 clover day, you can get 3 of them for free. You could maybe get 1 more from the barrels if you had to.
Which is how many cranks? 3 turns?
Well,
two cranks.
It's 2, and then there's a chance for hitting a mimic, so it's probably like 2.5 or something.
Okay.
So you could conceivably get maybe 4 clovers. If you were trying to get all your ores with clovers, that means 1 clover for the wand, 3 clovers for ores, and now you don't have any clovers left. So that's why, like, Genie Wishing that Mountain Man is a really good idea in a 1-day run, because that's going to free up probably 2 or even possibly 3 clover uses.
Yeah, and then that's why the cat there is so nice, because before you'd probably have to spend a clover or digitize. Well, digitizing it would just feel really bad, but I guess it's an option.
You could duplicate before.
So because of all these cuts in resources, that does bump your actual turn count of a
Right.
one-day run, correct?
Yeah, now the difficulty here is that if you're trying to compare to other players, you have very few data points. With like 2-day runs, you can see hundreds of players have done them. 1-day runs for standard and for most challenge pass, there's usually only like 2 or 3 people that are doing them. So it's hard your first time through to gauge how long it's going to take. I would say in standard right now, just using that as a reference, I would expect a 1-day softcore run to probably take you maybe 50 or 60 turns more than a 2-day hardcore run. And that's even with pulling some good turn saving stuff. You end up losing about, I tried to count it up earlier today, probably about 60 or 70 adventures from losing all those item of the month resources, cutting them in half. And you lose, well, I forget what else. Actually that's it, is you just lose a lot of adventures from having less resources available. So
Disintegrate and your smoke bombs, etc.
oh yeah, some of the skills too. So like for me, I can do right now, I'm gonna just take a glance at the leaderboards at Kingdom of Loathing here. Standard's not hyper competitive right now, but I can do a run. Looks like I did about a 430 turn run. I would guess if I did a softcore 1-day run today, it would probably be around 460 turns or so. So that leads to a little bit of a problem, because obviously you do not have 460 turns in 1 day. So this is why I said it's better to just sort of compare it to a hardcore run. We're going to use up most of our Hank pulls on turn generation items, and really only have a few left for turn savings.
Which is completely different than your 2-day run, where you're pulling things
Right.
to save turns instead of generate more than enough.
And stuff that people really like to do in 2-day runs, like skipping the war, that's completely out. That's just plain not possible to do at all.
So you're probably still going to recommend that we use the packet of grass seed pull, though.
Yeah. I came up with a preliminary pull list, and I'll just try to sort of rattle off some of the better turn gen items. That is one of the few actual turn savings items that's still worth pulling. I think you mentioned that in a previous show. You can get essentially through 3 cornucopia for 1 pull with the packet of tall grass seeds. Now it won't be, actually it's probably about the same in 2-day or 1-day run. So should I just start sort of talking through how to plan out your turn gen?
I have got one question just before that, and that's assuming you're dedicating essentially all 20 pulls to turn gen. Just how many turns can you actually generate in standard in a 1-day run?
I was looking at this recently, and if you were to use every single pull, I think you can probably get up to like 550 turns, maybe. So still relatively high. That's not as high as it used to be. It used to be even higher because we don't have astral energy drinks anymore, and you can't drink hobo consumables, but you still could theoretically get up to about 540, 550 turns or so.
So that's sparing no expense, melange, ultra sour ball.
Yeah, that would be like using all 19 or 20 pulls on turn gen, and I think the price tag on that comes out to like 25 million meat. It's a very expensive if you do it that way.
How does this differ in a 1-day run, like real lifetime?
Yeah, I've done, it is, in terms of the number of hours, it would actually be comparable to a 2-day hardcore run. So if it takes you, let's say 7 hours to do a 2-day hardcore run, it's going to take you that long, or maybe even a little bit longer. I've done 2 standard 1-day runs, and I purposefully made sure I did them on a weekend when I had free time, because they took like 8 hours to do. They're very time consuming. So don't start 6 hours before rollover and think, oh, I'll squeeze in my 1-day run today, because you're probably not going to pull it off.
And the last thing you want to be doing is panicking when you're
Yeah.
at the very end.
Yeah, and
Spokes, Sporksan points out, doesn't a 1 day run take 1 day?
Okay, yes, you're correct. A 1 day run takes 1 day.
All right, so start walking us through some of those turn gen pulls for a 1 day.
Okay, so I came up with sort of a preliminary plan. I would say for me, maybe about 12 or 13 pulls I would devote to turn gen. So let's just mention some of the better ones. The two that I would absolutely recommend every time would be Spice Melange and Ultra Mega Sour Ball. These free up a total of 6 consumable space apiece. Assuming you have excess epic consumables that are worth maybe 6 adventures per space, that's 36 turns or so for each of these items. And if you pull a lot of epic consumables, it's even higher than that. So just between those two items, we're getting over 70 turn gen. Those are very strong pulls. I really don't think there's anything that can beat them. If you want to save money, you could try not pulling the sour ball, but chances are you're going to end up blowing money on something else if you don't pull that. So every time I would say pull both of those.
And next year we could also rely on, since I'm sure you're going to be talking about the Batfellow stuff, but we also have the half melanges from the Space Gate.
Right. So the alien plant pod and alien animal milk will just clear liver or stomach, 3 apiece. So those are essentially half strength, but they cost about as much as a Ultra Mega Sour Ball. So those are decent pulls. But if you want to save money, there's other stuff you could sub in instead. So the next thing, my next favorite set of consumables to pull is the Batfellow consumables, like you said. Definitely the top 4 ones, which are Doc Clocks, Mr. Burnsger, Mad Liquor, and Plumber's Mushroom Stew. Those all give you pretty high yield compared to other epic consumables. The cocktail and the Burnsger are maybe an extra 16, 17 adventures, and the next 2 are maybe 11 or 12 adventures. So definitely pull those. The last 2 Batfellow consumables, the Kudzu and the Miss Graves Vermouth, those are maybe 7 or 8 turns over other consumables. So those are okay, but it's just going to kind of depend on your diet planning. There's a couple other good consumables to pull, and unfortunately one of them I really like, but the market for it is probably going to slowly go up over time. That is the Resisto Rudoso. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. This was the Drunksgiving or Drunksgiving 2.0 item that came out last Thanksgiving. It's an epic consumable, 5 liver, and it gives like 37 adventures, I think. So this is a significant step up over other consumables you could use. And the nice bonus with that is you can pull that and a Frosty's mug, and assuming you have the resistance to survive it, get another, I think it's another 11 adventures off of that.
Nice.
That's most of the consumables. The one other strategy that people sometimes do is pull Gallon of Milk. By itself, that's not a good source of turns, but again, you can use the Old Scratch's Fork here, which multiplies your turn gen by 30% or 1.3, and that ends up pushing it up so it's worth maybe an extra 10 or 11 turns or so. So
yeah, I think when we start talking about pull lists later, I think we calculated the average yield.
Yeah.
For the salad plus milk.
I think that's pretty much it for just direct consumables. I don't think I've missed. There's probably a couple other epic foods you might think about. A couple more items here I want to mention.
Just before you do, Sawyer, about how much does a 1 day run cost you on average?
Let's see here. So the Batfellow consumables, I know I added up here. Let me just look at my price tag. Probably if you are between Batfellow consumables, the Sour Ball, and a couple other items that you might pull, it's probably going to end up being somewhere between 10 and 15 million meat. If you had to pull both of those alien plant pod and alien animal milk, that's going to push it up to more like 20 or even a little higher than 20. So it's something that, basically once per path or once per standard per year that most people will be able to afford. It's not something where you can do a 1-day run every day or even every week for most players.
So some of this other stuff that you undoubtedly pull in a 1-day run will be the same things that you would pull if you were just doing a 2-day run.
Right. I did want to mention one more sort of interesting item, and that is the Mime Army Challenge coin. If people are familiar with this can grant 30 adventures. So that means really after the Sour Ball and Melange, it's probably the next best pull. But of course, the downside to this is it is a coin that you literally can flip the wrong way and lose 30 adventures. So if you're trying to do a 1-day run on the last day of a path, don't pull that coin because that's going to, 50% chance of screwing you over. So there's a couple other items, but I think that's probably enough to cover for now. Anyway, really between all that stuff I said, that's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 turn gen. So if you pulled all that and maybe a few more items, that would probably be enough to pull off a 1-day run.
I think that's a good segue into, I think, just talking about pulls in general. Do we want to talk about the G-Lover specific pulls first? Was there many of those?
For the most part, the G-Lover path was similar to standard planning, but the two major changes were that clovers were much more worthwhile. This happens anytime you have a Copperhead path, because the Red Zeppelin zone benefits quite a bit from clover use. And along with that, the, what's it called? Lewd playing cards, which give 178 sleaze damage, something like that.
138?
Oh, 138. Yeah, I overestimated that a little bit. But those were much better pulls in that path. The one downside of that path was you couldn't use cornucopia. I think it turned out by the end of the path it was still definitely worth skipping the war, but it took quite a few more pulls. Usually with cornucopia pulls, it's maybe 18 pulls or so.
17-ish, 18, depending on the calculator.
So with just pulling fluffers, it's 24 or 25. But that still made sense in that path.
Enemies, did you have... By the way, congratulations on your topping the leaderboard on both the hardcore and softcore side of G-Lover. Do you have anything to add as far as special pulls?
I want to really plug just how insane dice gear is. I know, Sawyer, you've not used dice gear much, but you've been intrigued quite recently about that due to some talk in hardcore lately, correct?
Yeah, that's one of those things that I'm pretty sure pays off in most paths. It's just a little bit trickier, and I think it makes combats more tricky because you have to kind of watch out for some of those random effects, right?
I was running 2 dice gear pieces, so you can have like annoying or phase shifting, which is where your attacks and skills get blocked, as well as like passive elemental damage per turn, and it can quickly go south.
It also really benefits from you having an extensive perm list, because you might end up using some of these things that you would never normally use.
So speaking of OCRS, what actually are these dice gear pieces?
There's 7 total, right?
There's one for each. So basically there was an old challenge path, which was one crazy random summer, and the in-path and out-of-path reward is a piece of dice gear which gives you 1 monster modifier. So as a seal clubber, you'll get the dice ring. As a, I think, disco bandit, you get the dice do-rag, both of which were the ones I pulled in G-Lover because they both have Gs. So there are about 68 modifiers, and there are a few really nice ones for... which are for good in run. One of which is, I can't remember which one it is, but one gives you the monster more
pixelated,
monster level.
Right?
Yeah, the pixelated one is probably the biggest reason that it's run at all, because you can actually skip ghosts / whatever other method people use to get white pixels these days by just getting 30 pixels from the random pixelated modifier. Which is why you run 2 dice pieces, because you need you need to have more chance. I think the chance goes a little bit better than ×2 when you run 2 because you can't get certain modifiers at the same time. So it's something like 1 in 30 something to get a pixelated monster each combat. And it works out about 23 white pixels in 400 combats. That's not counting the other pixels you get, which obviously can be changed into white pixels. So it's really, really nice to be able to skip ghosts. So essentially 7 turns if you digitize a ghost. And a wish, which is quite nice in a 2-day run. You also get hippie gear. So you get the hippie and or frat ensemble. So you can take the non-frilly path, non-hot pocket.
So yeah, that means you don't have to worry about picking up those hot wings from the friars.
Especially in standard, well, you would obviously only run this in softcore because that's how you pull them, but you don't have to use, you can use your stench jelly and you don't feel bad that you don't get any hot wings, which I think, you do use stench jelly, right, in the friars still?
Yeah, you can usually fit 1 or maybe 2 in there if you do it right.
Yeah, or more. It depends.
And then miscellaneous modifiers drop random stuff after a fight. And speaking of which, those are not like regular drops because if you use, for example, the internet, what's the modifier called where you can use like the special skills like medicine
with science?
With science, yeah, the with science modifier. If you use that, like the thought thingy, which essentially ends the combat without giving you items or meat, you still get those items. So they're not normal drops, they are applied after the combat in some way. And you can just feed them to your Aston Martin, or you can auto sell them. So it's just extra meat. Overall, excellent pull, and I'd recommend people to look into that. But it makes runs combat a lot more challenging, let's
Absolutely, say. Which will, again, take you a little more time to work through in an Ascension. I know last year, because of the potted tea tree still being in standard, getting the modifiers in hardcore was possible. I'm hesitant to say that it's worth it in 2018 standard, a full wish to get that effect.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Hilariously, Jake said if dice gear ever becomes optimal, he said he'd nerf it.
So let's talk about standard now. I want to call it like 3 sets of pulls that I think are, no matter where you're at in your skill perm roster or how many items of the month you have, that these are probably going to be some really solid pulls. What's that first set of gear?
Well, we have this sort of organized by, I guess, sort of roughly in order here. One of the sets of items that's always good to pull is basically the swashbuckling outfit, the pants, the parrot, and the eye patch. And the one trick, it's not super critical for players who have plenty of turns, but the one nice trick for newer players is you go ahead and pull a clockwork pirate skull. As long as you do the Degrassi route, you can...
Which, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, there's hardly ever... every time there's a new path, someone will say, oh, you should go the desert in this path, and inevitably by the end of the path, all the people at the top of the leaderboard are going to Degrassi. So unless something...
So I was just going to say, I was one of those people. I was thinking, in G-Lover, at the very start, I was like, oh my god, we can get drinks and actually have something nice to drink. And then we realized that you actually do get the pirate outfit and get the bridge anyway. So yeah.
I kind of thought the same thing. I thought, maybe you want to get those drinks, but then by the end of the path. So anyway, go to Degrassi. This is yet one of the other benefits of going the Degrassi moon sign. That is, you can pull a clockwork pirate skull. They're not too expensive. And untinker it. That will give you an eye patch, and it will let you make a clockwork maid, which is 8 free rollover adventures. So usually in softcore, I will pull, if I'm doing a 2-day softcore run, I will pull at least 2, if not all 3 of these pieces of gear. Every once in a while, I'll go farm one of them for fun. But in general, the pirate gear is very good because you don't want to be searching around in those non-combats.
It's a very swingy area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you, when you farm them for fun, I hope you enjoy your 20 moxie stack when you're a seal clubber, like every turn
Yeah.
in those terrible
I
non-combat.
don't remember what the base rate in that zone is. The only thing I've been doing now is if for some reason I have a yellow ray and nowhere to use it, I will actually do that zone with plus combat and just yellow ray for like the pants or the parrot. But in general, those are all good pulls. So probably just assume you're going to pull those automatically.
Yeah, LAR told me I think it's a 60% non-combat zone, so 40% combat zone.
Right.
All right, Animus, what's this next set of gear that's a really great pull?
Well, this is also something I don't have much. I'm not, as most of you probably know, I'm not really renowned for softcore. G-Level was my first kind of attempt at softcore, really. But the ninja assassins, those pulls are not. They seem like something that should be quest items, or you'd think they'd be quest items, but they're in fact not. And you can pull those for what is apparently about 4 turns per piece. Is that something you often pull? Sawyer?
Yeah, that's a pretty good pull. Somewhere on the wiki, I'm probably not going to be able to find it. Somebody has done math that I think is trustworthy on how likely you are to get that first ninja. And I think if you can run
13%ish.
Yeah, if you run like plus 25%, I think the expected number of turns for the first one is around 6 or so. Somebody can check that if they want. Usually the best way to do it if you're not pulling stuff is to use some sort of copiers. So like I will use Love and Amarangs on the ninjas. But even so, that's probably effectively about 10 or 11 turns that are wasted getting the ninjas. So pulling those are going to save probably 3 or 4 turns a piece. And certainly if you don't have skills that boost your combat, like Carl Weathers or the Musk skill, you definitely want to pull those, because running that zone without that full 20 or 25% combat boost makes it very hard to get that gear. Yeah, and it's a very swingy zone too. So I don't remember who I just saw the other day. Somebody said that they ran 25% and went all the way to turn 11 before they got their ninja. So in general, those are great pulls.
In a similar vein, how about script pulls? That's the beach vacation money stuff that you get, so you can buy the dingy plans for the dingy planks to open the island. How often do you find yourself pulling any of those? Sorry.
I will usually pull maybe 2 or 3 of them. It's sort of interesting right now in Softcore Standard. I sort of use 3 turns as a rough guide of whether or not something is worth pulling. I was looking through all the potential pulls for a 2-day run, and there's about 40 or so items that save over 3 turns, and then quite a few that only save me about 2 turns. So scripts are sort of like right on the edge where they're probably worthwhile, but maybe they're not. So it's really up to you. But those are pretty solid pulls if you're debating whether or not to pull one. Those are going to save a static 3 turns. The other slight bonus there is if you don't have a good source of meat, remember that those also save 500 meat fairly early in a run. So they're pretty good pulls.
So once again, we want to highlight that you're basing a 3 turns saved kind of minimum.
Right. And of course, that also, like for scripts, that's going to be the same for almost every player. For some of the other items that we mentioned, like we just mentioned Ninja Gear, for me, Ninja Gear is maybe only worth about 3.5 to 4 turns on average. For less experienced players, they're worth a lot more than that. So there may actually be better pulls than scripts for newer players, but it's still consistently a pretty good pull.
Another item that could potentially save you 3 turns is from Whitey's Grove. Tell us about that one.
So the wet stew is from Whitey's Grove. You almost always have to get that unless you want to slug it out in Palindome. I think there's some other method to get it.
I don't even know what that method is, honestly.
I think I did it once, probably on a multi, just to see how it worked. But in general, this is if you have a banish or a free runaway or something, it's going to usually take about 3 turns to get. The nice bonus with pulling that is you also don't have to worry about plus combat, and you don't have to worry about plus item, because that zone does require, I think, 300% item drops to cap the wet stew items, and I don't remember how much plus combat you're supposed to have in there.
It's not too much. I think it's 15. Yeah.
Anyway, again, that's another item that consistently should save maybe 3 or 4 turns. So it's a pretty good pull.
How about the gravy boat? Because the gravy boat, it's a one-time cost. I'm not sure how much it does cost now. Probably like 20k, something like that. But over the course of the curbed, I think it saves upwards of 4 turns, like 4 turns minimum. If you have nightmare fuel and stuff like that, it saves slightly less, banishes, etc. But yeah, upwards of 4 turns. Is that something that you find yourself pulling most runs?
Yeah, I will usually pull either gravy boat or this is going to get us into a sort of complicated topic, and that is how many cornucopias to pull in a run. Gravy boat, you can either just pull directly, or in some cases it makes more sense to pull an extra cornucopia and just craft it right away. That's going to depend on what character class you are and what path you're in. People can find, I don't think they're too difficult to find. Ezandora has a Thanksgarden calculator, and thank you to Ungawa for all that data.
Right, and I will post a link in the show notes for that.
Definitely use that. That's something that I plan out every run. You can plan out how many cornucopias it will take, probably within 1 pull. You can figure out how many it will take to skip the war. And then also along with that, if you can use some of those cornucopias for gravy boats or for turkey blasters.
Now, before we start talking about these cornucopias, which are rising in price, there is one more. What about blackberry galoshes? Is that something that you would consider pulling?
That's another one of those ones that's right on the edge where I probably would pull it just sort of to be lazy. If you can yellow ray or get high item drops and do the blackberry bush right away, it's possible that you could get galoshes pretty quickly. But I think consistently,
yellow ray or 567%
right,
item drop.
They're not super hard to cap, but that I've done the math on that before, and I think in most cases it's worthwhile to pull the galoshes. They tend to save about 3 turns compared to yellow rain, a blackberry bush, and then crafting them right away.
I'm personally not that much of a fan of galoshes, but I mean, I could be converted, but I think the math was between 2 to 3 turns, and I feel like in that case you may as well just pull a clover and use that instead.
Yeah, it's one of those, sort of right on the edge of whether or not it's worth pulling or not. I would just say if you have extra room in your pull list, you could just be lazy and pull them, but don't be afraid to take something else if you want something else.
Just to mention quickly is something I accidentally spaded. I'm not sure how well known it was, but you can't get the first super likely in the Black Forest without having first got 1 out of 5 exploration done, because there's 5 landmarks in the Black Forest, and until you get the first landmark, you can't get the first super likely. So that's, at first I thought the delay was like 5 turns or 4 turns with the map. Like it was really weird and confusing. Like I think you even said one day, like that one time you had 6 turns before the first super likely came, right, Sawyer?
Yeah, I found that annoying because sometimes I would use the champagne bottle to cap the blackberry bush, and I don't remember if it was 6, but I was used to it being 4 turns and then a blackberry bush, or 4 combats, and several times I've had 5 and wasted a use of my champagne bottle trying to get that.
Yeah, so, and the reason behind that is what I accidentally spaded, because I was running away from combats, because I had like you said, I had my champagne bottle equipped so I could cap the blackberry bush, and I just wasn't getting, so I ran away twice. I wasn't getting the super likely. I was like, maybe I should do another combat and see what happens. And then, yeah, lo and behold, I got the 1 out of 5, and then obviously the next turn was the super likely. So, yeah, interesting interaction there.
Right on. So these, 9, 10, 11 items that we talked about, they're all fairly inexpensive, assuming you just grab the single gravy boat hat. Cornucopias in bulk, that starts to get a little more expensive if you're buying them from the mall.
Should we say something that maybe can bring the price down? You can, if somebody wants to write a script, they can write a script to use Pokegrow fertilizers and swap in their Thanksgarden and get a bunch of extra cornucopias, because the fertilizers are cheaper than cornucopias right now, if they want to make a little profit.
One of the other item of the month derived items is the replica boomerang. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is at this point probably pretty expensive. What's Batfellow cost now?
It is hovering about 50 million.
Yeah. So if you don't have a Batfellow subscription, this is probably not a sensible thing to get at this point.
Can you get that replica boomerang in one go?
It does depend whether anyone else is actually doing a run, because obviously you get the money per run, and then the money helps the $1 billion or whatever it is, and then that helps you to do the run a bit faster. But I imagine you can probably do it. It's not overly competitive, if competitive at all. Most days no one does any runs. Monday is the worst day to do it because that's when the free ones come. So don't do it on Mondays.
Anyway, Boomerang is effectively three insta kills per day. So automatically those should be worth at least 3 runs or 3 turns.
And when you mean insta-kill, you mean free kill as opposed to like an exploding cigar, which instantly kills them and takes a turn.
Generally, when I say...
By the way, you've just made Garden, whatever they're called, fertilizers jump up to 35k, so yeah. Thanks for
Good
that.
work.
Yeah, yes. Clearly, I don't know economics very well. That's what happens is prices rise when somebody speculates on something. Anyway... Boomerang is essentially, it's acting as a shattering punch. Shattering punch is a skill from Snow Joe that gives you 3 free kills per day. Boomerang is doing the same thing. Plus, it doesn't cost any mana. So that's an excellent pull. It's at a bare minimum saving you 3 turns. It is possibly even saving you a little more than that, because you can do tricks where you will extend certain effects by using insta-kills. So for example, the modern zombies, people have a very hard time hitting that 850% initiative, but you can use like Steely-Eyed Squint and then use Shattering Punches and or Boomerang, and
I believe it's Bow-Legged Swagger?
Bow-Legged Swagger. I mixed that up. You can use that to cap the modern zombies and then extend that effect. So Boomerang is even a little bit better in that case. So at least 3 adventures per day that it's going to save you. So in a 2-day run, that's definitely comparable to most of the other pulls you could take.
I assume you skip it in a 1-day run, right? Because 3 turns just isn't enough.
Yeah, it's actually sort of questionable, because in a 1-day run, remember, we cut Steely-Eyed Squint in half. We only have 1 of those instead of 2, and we only have 1 Bow-Legged Swagger. So I still might pull it when I do a 1-day run.
Still make a case. Yeah, your resources are half.
That it's giving you, if you have, for example, if you have Shattering Punch, that's 3 insta kills. If you happen to have the Gingerbread City Kill, whatever that's called, mob hit, that would get you up to 4. So if you pull Replica Boomerang in a 1-day run, that's going to go from 4 insta kills to 7. It's possible you can make that pay off with Steely-Eyed Squint and Swagger. So I might still suggest it for a 1-day run. It's not a terrible pull.
Just a heads up, we will be sharing this extensive spreadsheet of pulls and various turn savings that Lift very, very meticulously went through.
So speaking of something that's a little less expensive, do you ever pull an infinite bacon machine in a 2-day run, assuming no nat?
Assuming no nat, I probably would not. If you don't have a nat, it is effectively going to be... Actually, it's really just going to be...
It's 1 daily dungeon malware.
I think print screens are 111, so it would only be 1 print screen. Yeah, if you don't have the nat, I probably would not suggest doing this. But if you do have the nat, the infinite bacon machine would give you 100 bacon per day. This is also very useful with familiar timing, because that means you really only have to run probably like 30 or 40 turns of your internet on day one to get a malware.
Which would give you enough slush to get your demon name and some slush bacon.
Yeah, so it sometimes leads to sort of a difficult trade-off question of how much you want to run your NAT. But certainly, a malware by itself is an okay pull if you can't get one and run. So I would say Infinite Bacon is a pretty good pull for a 2-day run. It's essentially going to earn you a malware and partway towards either another malware or a print screen. So that's a good pull.
Clara's Bell. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, Clara's Bell, I would actually say, looking over my 2-day run plans, Clara's Bell is technically the most powerful item that I pull. If you've used Stench Jellies before, Clara's Bell is actually a slightly better version of Stench Jellies. It will force a non-combat. Just using it sort of the normal intended way, if you were to use it twice in the Giant's Castle, depending on your non-combat rate, that's saving maybe about probably 2.5 turns per use, so maybe 5 turns if you used it there. But there's an even better place to use it, and that is in the hidden apartment. There's a trick you can do where you get thrice cursed either from fighting the shamans or from the cursed punches. And the way Clara's Bell works, I am not going to attempt to explain, but in the hidden apartment and hidden office, it will force those non-combats to come up.
So is that generally where you use it?
Yes, certainly if you kill a janitor and get a book of matches, I would just drink 3 cursed punches and then use it there. Even if you can't do that, like if you could fight 3 shamans in a row, Clara's is going to save, it's still going to be like 5 turns saved, right? Something like that, 4 or 5 maybe.
And it works again in both the office and the apartment.
Yes, it technically works in office. Now, you're usually not going to want to use it in both those zones. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time squeezing in the accountants on time. So you probably don't want to use it in both of them. Generally, the best place to use it is the apartment. It's possible you could make it work in the office instead. You could do the shamans in the apartment and maybe even squeeze in some accountants there, and then use it to force a non-combat in the office. But I usually use it in the apartment. So, and that's just one use of it. So in a 2-day run, I'll use probably one somewhere in the castle, and then use the other one in the apartment. So that's a total turn savings of like 7 or 8 turns. So it's
that sounds like a great
very
pull.
strong item.
We'll go through a few more. We've got lots and lots of stuff to
Right.
discuss in here, but just because we've got some user questions this week,
Okay.
some nice ones. So I think we'll go through maybe some of the pulls orientated for people who don't really have all that much, maybe few perms. So I'm looking on the spreadsheet, the healthy diet / turn gen pulls here. Do you want to walk us through some of those?
Briefly cover what we'll call like smoothing. Could consider pulling a machete if you don't have access to the internet or the genie. If you're low on meat or you don't have a good way to generate that, a facsimile dictionary. I think it could still be argued that it saves turns, but it certainly saves headaches.
It saves turns in the way that you can be ludicrously wasteful with your Aston Martin and it doesn't matter.
Right. And then you have, depending if you're doing a 2-day run and your access to keys, there's always a pulling, a hero pie if you need the turn gen along with the key, or maybe getting a malware token. And then as far as stats and leveling up, there is the new habit, which approximately like 80k in the mall to buy those X's, but that gives you a lot of stat gain. Anything in the diet that you would recommend pulling if you just need help getting the turn gen to make a 2-day run, Sawyer?
The main thing that I would say is if you don't have Source Terminal, Gallon of Milk is a really good pull. It's sort of annoying, especially to new players who maybe don't have high item drops. There's a slight penalty to items in meat and initiative, I think it is. But that's an easy source of stats and an easy source of turn generation. Now, if you have Source Terminal, I probably wouldn't bother with that because you can get several browser cookies.
So with the fork, I think we're looking at, what, 94-ish adventures?
Right. So let's say 94 over 15 space. So that's a yield of almost 6.3 adventures per fullness. So that's effectively makes it into a very good epic consumable if you take that fork. Now, the one thing you need to remember if you're a newbie is that fork is going to deal some hot damage to you. So make sure you have some high HP and hot resistance. But that's a good source.
If it kills you, it doesn't work, right? If it kills you,
I have no idea. I've never died to one, so
yeah, you have to survive. You have to survive the hot damage. So do keep that in mind.
Correct. And then also pull one of the community service boozes. So like the vintage smart drink. That's worth 50 adventures if you count ode to booze. So that's a pretty solid nightcap. Sawyer, walk us through what you and I we're gonna call misses.
Yeah, so generally at this point in the game, in standard and most challenge paths, you can usually cap almost every monster. It is still possible to miss either the Mohawk wig or the amulet. I know I think in one of my G level runs, I'm usually running like 400% item drops when I do the airship, maybe 400 or 500. So, even if you olfact a quiet healer, it is still possible to miss that amulet. If you're not holding a squint or something or yellow ray for the burly giant, you can miss that. So Mohawk wig and the amulet, if you miss them, it's generally not worth it to try to go back and farm them. Those are worth probably 3 or 4 turns if you miss them. Chance of adding turns to the giant zone. So those are okay if you miss them. Other stuff, since I already mentioned that Clara's Bell strategy, Book of Matches often makes sense to pull, even if you're not doing that Clara's thing. This can save several turns on the bowlers. So if you end up like banishing janitors and never fighting them, sometimes it still makes sense to pull a Book of Matches. If you have terrible luck in the tavern and you don't get any Tangle of Rat Tails, either pulling the Tangles or even just simply Tomb Ratchets is a choice. I usually don't do that, but there have been a couple runs where somehow I, ran 150 monster level and still didn't get any Tangles, so it made sense to pull like one Tangle to speed up the pyramid.
Speaking of which, just to slip that in there, you can actually heist Tangle of Rat Tails,
right,
with the burglar cat. So
usually the situation where that makes sense doing is sometimes I will use turkey blasters. Like if I have a lot of wanderers and a lot of turkey blasters, I want to blast at least the top floor of the pyramid. Sometimes I'll blast the middle floor too. So like if you're doing that, you need to have a lot of Tangles to make sure you can get all those Tomb Ratchets. So it's possible that that's a sensible strategy would be to fight one and then heist it as well. We have an Inhaler on the list. That's really only for newer players who can't get high meat drops. In general, just think about if you're at like plus 900% meat and you're doing the nuns, the Inhaler is going to save maybe 2 turns.
Yeah, a good rule of thumb is about a turn saved per 100%.
Yeah,
meat.
that's if you're somewhere close to like 900 or 1,000%. Now, if you're lower, then it's going to be a little bit better. But I generally wouldn't pull an Inhaler. Other miss stuff is Star Chart. If you happen to miss the Star Chart, I sometimes will pick it up with the demon name, but otherwise that's a decent pull. Other things we have on here is disposable instant cameras. Sometimes you have bad luck on the whatever zone that is, hidden bedroom, and you can't get the second ornate nightstand. That's not a bad pull. The one other thing we have on here is drum machine. That's sort of dependent on there's just a lot of factors that influence that. But if you happen to miss that, you could pull that to save a few turns in the desert. You definitely always want to use drum machine and the worm riding pages in any path where that is an option. So if you somehow miss that blurs drum machine, that's an okay pull.
We've covered the pull list pretty well, and we'll make this available and attach it to the show notes as well. So you said we had some questions to work through.
Yeah, if we look on our secret spreadsheet, we have episode 3 questions here. So
I'm on it.
Someone asked, I'm sorry, I forgot to put names here. So if you win a prize, we'll do it at the end anyway. But someone asked, as far as killing bosses for quests goes, is it better to save them all for near the end of the run, or are there some that should be sequenced throughout? The only thing about bosses I can think of is that I think, don't bosses get like a boost to stats, substats gained, despite their monster level?
Yeah, in general, I don't know what the actual formula is, but in general, they are worth more substats than other monsters. The one thing that maybe is worth remembering is bosses will give you a slight meat bonus as well. Unfortunately, the bosses that tend to drop meat are ones that I like to delay towards the end of the run anyway. So like the Gror drops like, I think you can get 5,000 meat from him, or 5 dense meat stacks.
Yeah, but they're at the stacks anyway, right? So
yeah.
I mean, you can't. Your modifiers won't work there, right, at least.
I tend to push off most of my bosses for later. One of the reasons for that is if you are really obsessive about using like banishes and digitize and other effects properly, there are just a lot of situations where like you need to burn up 2 or 3 turns. And if you just sort of ignore bosses, then they always serve as a convenient little buffer for, like, if you're waiting for an Aston Martin banish and you need 2 more turns until it's available, then you could go back and say, oh, I can go back and fight the Gror, or I can go back and fight the Goblin boss or something.
Yeah, it's a perfect buffer.
And just one thing I like to tell you is that I put on my my garbage shirt, the one that does the double stats against bosses, because obviously you get a bit more substats for your book. So putting that shirt on doubles them. So yeah, a little bit better than using it on, say, a normal monster. Lift, we've still, because we started a little bit late, I think we can still go for another 10 minutes and get some more questions in. Okay.
We had one about the mini game. Phrased so well, I think I just have to read it out loud, and we'll give a translation. It says, Lift, it seems that you like to boat. Do you do it around that Bastille moat? Is there any advice to be had? Because the mechanics are confusing and bad. But its drops are definitely not one note. So he's asking, do we know anything about the mechanics behind the Bastille or Cheese Cookie War Machine minigame?
I know that people use potions and then look for cheese.
Yep, so is that about our strategy still so far?
I don't know about you guys, but I haven't really bothered optimizing it. I haven't gotten any of the rewards yet because I've been pretty much ignoring it. But yeah, definitely use, if you wanted to get high on the leaderboard, definitely use all 3 potions. I don't know, is there a reason to go like defense versus offense? Is there any benefit to one of those over the other?
You can fail if you defend. There's some people who never attack, like I think it's the avant-garde castle never attacks, so if you defend, nothing happens and you have to attack anyway. I think you can fail at attacking as well. I think someone said that they usually bide their time, and then bide the time usually gives the better option, but it's really confusing how that all works. I don't know, especially because there's some missing text apparently when you don't get the jump and you use your defense. Like, there is no text to say that you didn't get the jump. It just sort of randomly uses your defense, and that was very confusing for the first couple of days.
Sure, we'll keep following up on this, so as we get better at this mini game.
Joe the Sorcerer asked, what do you use for your song boom usually? This is where fiddle comes in, because it'd be really, really nice to have a Mafia tracker for the song boom, because at least at the start of the run, I feel like you want to, because if people don't know, you can the buff that you run on the song boom you can run that for the turns before you do your drop without it impacting what drop you get. So, for example, you run 10 turns of plus meat and then change to Nightmare Fuel. The Geiger one for the Nightmare Fuel on the 11th turn, and then the Nightmare Fuel will drop. Then you go back to meat, for example, which is obviously quite fiddly, and there's no proper tracker in Mafia because it's very, very difficult to make it work properly.
And then keep in mind, too, that at the start of an Ascension, your first drop will come from the Song Boom on the second combat that takes a turn. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. Same again on day 2. And all subsequent days.
I didn't know that about day 2.
The counter starts at 9. Yeah.
Thanks
the
for
counter
the
starts at
clarification
9
on
after rollover or upon a new Ascension, the counter resets to 9. So the drop happens on the counter goes to 11, then obviously resets back to 0. So
yeah, so
keep that in mind.
The trick there is that you generally want the 2 good things at the same time, which is the Nightmare Fuel and the meat fairly early in the run. So like you said, probably the best way to do that is run the meat one for a while and then switch over to Nightmare Fuel just for that one drop and then switch back. I generally, this actually has the effect of pushing off my food consumption slightly later in the run if you're short on turn gen. Certainly on like day 2, you could try to get some of that special seasoning, but that depends on the challenge path, though. And in many cases, you could just completely ignore the special seasoning.
There's someone asking again about port scan. I think we'll probably make an infographic for that. So that's the port scan, Son of a Beach.
Yeah, I'm working on that already. So hopefully that'll be finished next week or next podcast.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, when is monster level too much monster level? And the very, very simple answer to that is it costing you turns? That is, are you dying? If you're ever dying, yes, too much. Because the turns saved from the stats probably don't outweigh the turns lost from dying to that monster. So if you're dying or it's costing you a hell of a lot of meat to actually keep up with combat, yeah, too much.
It's been a long time since generally the 2 easiest combat character classes, I think, are Seal Clubber and maybe even Postomancer, since you have the Thralls. And it's been a long time since I've not run those 2 classes, so I don't even remember what's reasonable for other character classes. Seal Clubber, I can run 150 monster level. I would not run that on turn 0, but like turn 10 or 20 or so. I don't really know if that's necessary at this point, though. There's so many sources of stat gain. But definitely, if you're going to go over 150, make sure you know what you're doing, because you're really risking getting beaten up a lot.
So just before we wrap up, Sawyer, you see in the underneath the podcast chat, there's a funny custom familiar names.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to just pick which one you think is funniest, have a quick scroll, and then that person will get a Mr. Accessory, and perhaps I'll look at later and give some melanges out to some runners-up. So just a quick look, and if you want some more time, we can do this after the. You can decide later, but I'll let you decide at the very least.
Okay,
Is there anything that springs to mind?
Well, I guess we'll go with the Joe the Saucer has a tree fitty for Crimbo Shrub.
It's a tree. I loved the mini hipster name by ALAVG. The books were better.
Joe says it's a tree. It's not the fact that it's a blackface joke. So I think that's okay for a Mr. Accessory.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that, Liff? Which one?
Oh, I like the mini hipster from AL.
The books were better.
Yeah, the books were better.
I think I actually read the books because of KOL.
Wait, which books?
What's it called? The Life of something. Liv, help me out here.
Nope.
It's the mini hipsters based on.
I thought this was just. I thought this was just a hipster joke, like that hipsters were, claiming that the books are better.
Oh.
I actually took it that way too. I didn't know that was based on books either, so I have some research to do. I feel bad.
I thought we were doing like a double pun, like the seat.
So it was way cleverer than I was.
Yeah, it was like double clever.
Excellent.
I think it wins then.
I might be able to spit out another Mr. Accessory on that. We'll see. But speaking of clever, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show, Sawyer. I'm sure we'll have you on again because there are more gold to be sniped by you.
Yes, there's no shortage of topics that I could ramble on a long time about. So,
speaking of that too, I will include a link to your Twitch name because you do have several videos, and sometimes if you're just doing some chores or cleaning or something, it's nice to just listen to those and listen to someone talk about KOL. It's always fun.
The ones that I think might be useful is I tried to make a couple that are just straight up tutorials about specific mechanics. So those might actually be useful for people. The Ascension ones,
I would say that they're very useful.
Good.
Yes.
So.
Oh, someone says it's Scott Pilgrim versus the World, so that's why I was thinking it was the books are better, but obviously, I got a joke to end on.
Well, how could we resist? Go for it.
If I can remember the punchline, but I can't remember how the joke goes.
Eating pizza?
Why do hipsters eat their pizza straight away?
No, you have it wrong. It's how did the hipster burn his tongue?
Ah, yeah, because he ate it before it was cool.
There we go.
Yeah, see, I butchered that one.
On that note, thank you again, everyone, for listening live, and Sawyer.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.